Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I bought a forgotten lake to escape the chaos of climate work, I never imagined the real storm would come in the form of an HOA president in pearls, armed with fake maps, legal loopholes, and a smile sharp enough to gut a man's peace. This is how they tried to steal my land. I didn't buy a lake to make a statement. I bought it because I was tired of federal grant committees, motel showers, and the slow death of my sanity in climate conferences. 7 years I'd been hopping around the Southeast, consulting on wetland restorations and stormwater reclamation. Projects would start, money would run out, and I'd be off again, clipboard in hand, never home long enough to plant a tomato. So when I stumbled on a 7.4-acre overgrown sinkhole that used to be a private fishing club, I felt like I'd found a relic. No HOA, no zoning shackles, just trees, algae, old beer cans, and potential. The place had been forgotten. Literally, the previous owner had inherited it after the club folded in the early 2000s and never did a damn thing with it. The shoreline was a mess. Tangled brush, rotting docks, a half-submerged boat that looked like it had hosted a murder or two. But the water tested clean, the groundwater flows were still active, and the birds hadn't given up on it. That was all I needed. I bought it outright, used most of what I'd saved from those grant years. People thought I was insane. You bought that swamp behind the pines? But I had a plan. I got a local geotech crew to check the dam, hired an ecological consultant to help with shoreline stabilization, and spent every damn weekend hauling garbage, chainsawing invasives, and replanting native grasses. I camped out in a tent for the first month just to be there full-time. Mosquitoes nearly carried me off twice. Within 2 months, the place started breathing again. I had cleaned up the lake bed, stabilized the north bank with tiered stonework, and laid gravel paths weaving through the trees. I pulled all necessary county permits. I wasn't stupid. I documented everything. Even brought in a surveyor to confirm that the parcel was well outside any HOA boundaries. The land was privately zoned, stood alone on its own plat, and had no covenant encumbrances, as my lawyer liked to phrase it. I printed that line out and framed it in my Airstream. I added 3 open-air gazebos made from reclaimed wood, got approval to install compost toilets near the trailhead, and built 2 small cottages, one for me and one as a rentable retreat. All code compliant. Whisper Lake Haven, I called it, had the sign laser etched and everything. Folks in town started to hear about it. A quiet place, nature forward, no loud parties or boat races, just birds, hammocks, and the occasional yoga teacher looking for her soul space. I didn't judge. It was never meant to be a business, not in the traditional sense. But by month 7, I'd hosted 3 weekend photography retreats, partnered with a local birdwatching group, and even scheduled a small gathering with an eco-tourism nonprofit from Savannah. All above board, taxes paid, insurance in place. The sheriff himself had come out once for a barbecue and left with fresh bass and a full smile. I finally felt settled. The smell of pine sap in the morning, the way frogs croaked like broken wind chimes after rain. It all made sense. This wasn't just property, it was restoration. Of a landscape maybe, but mostly of me. So when the woman in the blazer showed up, notebook in hand, and that patented HOA smile stitched onto her face, I didn't know yet that peace has predators. She showed up on a Tuesday afternoon like she owned the path beneath her feet. I was restaining the deck rails on the lakeside cottage when I saw her. Woman in her 60s, power walking in dress flats, holding a leather folio like it was a court summons. She didn't wave, just scanned the area like a health inspector looking for violations. "Mr. Wells?" she asked, voice sharp enough to carve granite. I set my brush down and nodded. "That's me." She handed me a card like we were at a networking event. Karen Morrison, President, Fairview Waterside Homeowners Association. I blinked. Fairview Waterside? That's on the other side of the Timberbelt. She smiled, the kind that had no warmth. "We've recently updated our jurisdictional zoning map. Turns out this lake and its adjoining parcel are now part of our extended recreational overlay." She said it like I should be thanking her for the upgrade. "Sorry," I said, "but this land isn't part of any HOA." It never has been. Karen opened her folio. Inside were printed maps, highlighted sections, and a form clipped to the front. "Here's a voluntary compliance packet. You'll need to sign and submit to formally acknowledge your membership. Standard procedure. We'll also need a brief inventory of your structures and recreational amenities so we can issue proper use certifications. It took a moment to register that she was serious. "This land is privately zoned," I said slowly, trying not to laugh. "I have the deed, the county approval letters, the exemption from covenant overlays. I even have the plat map with official notations. Your association ends over half a mile east of here." Your own bylaws confirm that Karen didn't flinch. She tucked the folder under her arm, stepped back, and took a slow, sweeping look around. The gazebos, the cottages, the trails. Then, without asking, she took out her phone and started taking photos. My sign, my fence, even my dock. "I'm going to need you to stop that," I said, walking toward her. "It's for inventory," she replied. "There is no inventory." "This isn't yours." She looked at me the way someone might look at a dog who just barked at a piano. Pity and mild amusement. "You're clearly unaware how community governance works in this county. Once your property falls within the overlay, we're obligated to assess its compatibility with the Fairview standards. You've built unpermitted structures. That dock isn't regulation height. And that cottage," she nodded toward the guest unit, "appears to be used for commercial lodging." We'll need to address that I couldn't even form words for a second. "Ma'am, with all due respect, get off my land." She left, but not in defeat. She left with data, photos, notes, a head full of intentions. She didn't argue, didn't yell, didn't threaten. That was the worst part. She acted like it was already a done deal, like she just needed to fill out some paperwork, and Whisper Lake Haven would be folded neatly into her HOA's little empire. The next day, I received an email. Subject line, "Welcome to Fairview Waterside Community." It came with an attached document outlining my provisional HOA dues schedule, a calendar of upcoming community meetings, and a list of corrective action items regarding my so-called infractions. Included was a notice that my use of the guest cottage for unauthorized rentals would incur a retroactive fine of $400. I laughed so hard I dropped my coffee. Then I printed the email, attached it to my deed copy, and sent the entire thing to my lawyer with a sticky note. "Tell me this is a joke. Please." But I already knew it wasn't. I'd seen that look in Karen's eyes before. Not anger, not righteousness, acquisition. And those kinds of people don't ask permission. They just draw new maps. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from the county's Environmental Compliance Office. It was thick, printed on ivory stock, and smelled faintly of toner and dread. The first line read, "Notice of temporary reclassification, Whisper Lake Parcel 42C suspended from private registry, pending ecological and recreational use review." I read it twice, then a third time, then once more, out loud, just to confirm I hadn't slipped into some bureaucratic fever dream. Apparently, at the formal request of the Fairview Waterside HOA and its designated representative, Ms. Karen Morrison, my entire property had been flagged for a discretionary review under some obscure clause about emerging community assets. It was a clause meant for things like shared greenways or drainage retention ponds, not a privately deeded lake with cabins and a composting toilet. That same evening, I checked the Fairview HOA website. Right there on their homepage, under 2025 Development Initiatives, was a bright new section. Coming soon, Fairview Nature Preserve and Lakefront Wellness Zone. They'd used a stock image of a lake that vaguely resembled mine, with yoga mats laid out on a dock and people sipping smoothies under a shady pavilion. In their project map, my 2 cottages were labeled Future Community Rest Lodges, and my gazebo near the trailhead was marked as a planned meditation rotunda. It would have been funny if it weren't horrifying. Then the complaints started. The first was from a woman named Loretta, claiming I hosted disruptive events that kept her dog awake. Her house was over half a mile away, on the other side of a forest, but she was adamant. Next came a letter from a man named Derek about illegal commercial activity in a residential zone. Then a third notice, this one from the HOA's pseudo-legal subcommittee, accusing me of unlicensed vehicle storage, referencing a canoe rack. Every accusation was nonsense, but every complaint triggered a form, a notice, a deadline. Suddenly, I was drowning in paperwork, noise mitigation reviews, off-street parking studies, zoning rebuttals. Then came the foot soldiers. I spotted them just after sunrise. 2 men in matching Navy vests labeled Fairview HOA Patrol. Not county officials, not deputies, Just HOA volunteers playing enforcer with clipboards and pocket cameras. They walked the edge of my gravel drive, pointed at my signage, took notes by the guest house. One even leaned over to inspect a solar panel like he was OSHA. I met them halfway down the path. "You're trespassing," I said. "We're performing compliance documentation," one of them replied without making eye contact. "This is now a community concern under review. You don't have jurisdiction here." He smiled, lifted a laminated sheet, and pointed to a line that said, "All properties within the designated wellness overlay subject to fair inspection by HOA agents. Pending formal transfer." "Formal transfer of what?" I asked. "Of management rights," he said, like that was a totally normal thing to say about someone else's land. I told them to leave. They didn't argue, just kept taking photos as they backed out, snapping pictures of everything from my fire pit to the license plate on my truck. 2 days later, a new notice appeared on my fence post. "Notice of violation, unauthorized use of natural water feature." It was printed in blue ink, signed by Karen Morrison, and bore a Fairview waterside seal that looked like a duck choking on. Legalese. I went straight to the sheriff's department. The deputy on duty squinted at the paper and said, "This isn't an official order." "No kidding," I replied, "but they're treating it like one." The deputy promised to look into it, which I'm pretty sure meant dropping it in a drawer until it expired. I went home and installed 2 more trail cams, one facing the dock, one hidden in the trees above the driveway. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer and stared at the lake, wondering how the hell a private piece of land with 32 different pieces of paper proving my ownership had suddenly become public property on someone else's website. And I realized something bone deep. They weren't playing fair, they were playing strategic. And strategy doesn't care about facts, only about perception. I was only gone for 4 days. Drove up to Asheville to visit an old friend, another environmental contractor I'd worked with during a wetland cleanup years back. We hiked, drank bad beer, complained about policy. I left my trail cams running, my guest house locked, and a handwritten note taped inside the supply shed. Back Friday. Please don't burn the place down. I got back late Friday afternoon and didn't even make it past the gate before I knew something was wrong. The gravel path bore fresh tire marks. Not mine. One of the gazebo roofs had been caved in, like someone had leaned something heavy across the ridge beam. Trash had been left beside the compost bin. 2 plastic cups, an empty chip bag, and a crumpled HOA brochure. But what stopped me cold was the sign. A professionally printed 6-foot-wide panel staked into the grass near the lake's edge. Future home of Fairview Wellness Park. Community access coming soon. Below it, in smaller font, Phase 1. Construction begins pending zoning finalization. There was no contact number. No disclaimer, just a seal. Fairview Waterside HOA. I ran to the guest house, shoved my key in the door, and it jammed. I tried again. Nothing. The lock had been changed. I circled around to the back patio, found a window slightly ajar, pushed it open and climbed inside. Everything looked intact at first glance. No ransacking, no theft. But someone had definitely been there. A cheap security sticker had been placed in the corner of the window. On the kitchen table was a single sheet of printer paper. Inventory in progress. Do not disturb. There wasn't even a name, just a smug little HOA watermark in the corner. I stormed back outside, barely keeping my hands from shaking, and called the sheriff's office. To their credit, they sent someone within the hour. A younger deputy, polite but obviously uncomfortable, walked the property with me. I showed him the broken gazebo, the sign, the changed locks, the trespass. Then I handed him the folder, the deed, the zoning documents, the HOA exclusion papers, everything. He read in silence, flipped through the pages, then exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, "this is complicated." "No, it's not. This is my property. They changed my locks, posted a sign, and put literature in my trash can." He scratched the back of his neck. "See, they've already filed a community dispute claim. They're asserting that the land's status is pending adjudication under a shared resource clause. That clause doesn't apply here. It's not part of any HOA. It never was. They filed with the zoning board, which gives them procedural standing, at least temporarily. Until that's resolved, I can't technically remove their sign. You're telling me someone can just walk onto my land, replace locks, and post propaganda because they filed paperwork? I'm saying the county's a mess," he muttered. And this HOA has friends in the wrong places. I stood there, stunned, as he gave me a copy of the incident report. It had a lot of vague phrases: possible civil dispute, pending legal review, temporary jurisdiction ambiguity. In other words, a pile of nothing. When he left, I walked back inside, grabbed my old field laptop, and pulled the SD cards from the trail cams. I scrubbed through the footage. One angle showed two men, the same faux patrol guys, pulling up in a white SUV, unloading the metal sign, then crouching near the cottage door. The second camera caught one of them unscrewing the lock cylinder and replacing it. Date stamped. Clear faces. No mistake. I saved everything to a hard drive and 2 flash backups. Then I called my lawyer. That night, a family of 4 showed up at the end of my driveway in a silver minivan. The mom leaned out and asked if the wellness park was open to the public yet. I told them they were on private land. She frowned and said, "But it's on the map now." "The map is a lie," I said, and shut the gate behind them. Inside, I sat down and realized something terrifying. I wasn't just dealing with nosy neighbors or overzealous volunteers. This was a coordinated land grab, and they weren't bluffing anymore. They were already moving in. Monday morning, my lawyer, a tough land use attorney named Connie Bishop, walked into her office clutching a stainless steel travel mug like it contained gasoline and justice. I handed her the drive with the trail cam footage, the HOA brochure, a printed screenshot of the website update, and every letter I'd received. She watched the footage twice in silence, then muttered, "Jesus, they weren't just poking the bear. They're already measuring the walls." Connie filed an emergency cease and desist motion by noon. Simultaneously, I hired a private investigator she recommended, a quiet guy named Roy, with the look of someone who once taught people how to disappear. His job was to find out just how deep this HOA hole went. 2 days later, he called me from a diner in town. "You're going to want to hear this in person," he said. "Bring a notebook." We met over burnt eggs and cold coffee. Roy opened a folder and began laying it out piece by piece. First, the Fairview HOA had in fact made an offer on my land nearly a year ago, back when it was still listed as abandoned lake parcel in the county database. The seller had refused. Twice. The second time, Karen Morrison herself had left a handwritten note offering community integration bonuses if the land was donated. That note was now in Roy's possession. The original owner had kept it, with her signature. Second, at the HOA's last quarterly meeting, a vote was held and approved to create a new northern amenity zone for residents. The minutes of that meeting, which Roy had obtained from a disillusioned HOA member, made several jaw-dropping assumptions. It named Whisper Lake as soon-to-be annexed recreational acreage, projected rental income from cottages after acquisition, and even listed potential contractors for landscaping and dock maintenance. They had already planned how to spend money from property they didn't own. Third, and this one turned my blood cold, Roy had found a memorandum of understanding signed between Karen and a county planning coordinator named Walter Drummond, requesting a preemptive overlay of the Whisper Lake parcel to be included in the Fairview Waterside Jurisdictional Review. Drummond had once sat on the board of Karen's property management company, and according to Roy, they had extensive history, including overlapping business entities. In short, the zoning office wasn't just being sloppy. It had been prepped, greased, and activated. Back home, I went through the HOA's public documents. There, tucked into an obscure appendix, I found it, a proposed expansion plan that had already been sent to the county for informal review. They used my property's GPS coordinates. They had redrawn the HOA map, with my lake already inside it. I felt sick. That night, as if the universe had a sense of comedic timing, another HOA officer came to my gate. This one was younger, maybe late 20s, wearing a polo with the Fairview logo and clutching a laminated clipboard like it gave him power. He asked to inspect the eastern gazebo for rot hazard compliance. I told him to get the hell off my land. He didn't argue, just made a note and walked off whistling. I drove straight to the county recorder's office the next morning and requested every document filed in the last 90 days involving Whisper Lake. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but complied. There it was. An unsigned community transition agreement naming my parcel as Phase 1 of Community Wellness Integration. No signature, no deed, no authorization, just words, maps, and bold assumption. but in bold type at the bottom, effective upon transfer of management authority. They weren't waiting to get my land. They were writing as if they already had it. I scanned the document, sent it to Connie, and wrote one sentence beneath the image. "We're past the line." Connie moved fast. Within 72 hours, she filed for a temporary restraining order against the HOA and submitted a formal complaint to the County Ethics Board regarding Walter Drummond's involvement. We served both with notices, hand-delivered by a process server who, bless his soul, had a flair for dramatic timing. He slapped Karen with the packet right as she stepped up to a podium during a Fairview HOA town hall. According to Roy, who was watching from a distance, the room went dead silent. Karen smiled, nodded, and continued her speech like nothing had happened. Of course she did. I wasn't expecting miracles. But the TRO stuck. A judge signed off on a temporary injunction banning the HOA from entering or altering my property, contacting guests, or referencing Whisper Lake in any official materials until further notice. It didn't stop them. 2 days later, I found new HOA flyers inside my mailbox. They advertised a community launch picnic at the North Shore Wellness Park, my lake. The flyers had a sign-up sheet for cottage yoga and guided paddle meditation. One of the photos was clearly my dock. My mailbox had a dent in it where someone had probably tried to cram in the stack too hard. I called the sheriff's office and filed a complaint for mail tampering. The deputy on the phone sounded genuinely exhausted. Meanwhile, Connie made a request for independent cadastral verification from a third-party GIS surveyor. The results, which arrived a week later, were definitive. Whisper Lake and its perimeter parcels were not and had never been within the Fairview Waterside HOA boundary. They had literally fabricated the expansion lines and uploaded them to their website without any legal annexation or procedural vote. Connie attached the survey to our legal response with a footnote that read, "This is not monopoly. You cannot claim property by printing it." But the real hammer dropped thanks to Roy. He secured an internal email thread between Karen and 2 HOA board members. It had been leaked by a disgruntled treasurer who'd finally realized things were spiraling. In the emails, Karen bragged about finally securing the lake and referenced me as just a holdout will push through with enough pressure. One board member expressed concern about legal exposure. Karen responded with, "Walter says as long as we act like it's ours, the optics will work in our favor. The county won't intervene if it looks community-based." She had written it. In writing. Connie grinned when she read it. That's not just overreach. That's intent. While she prepared a motion to escalate our case to civil conspiracy and fraud, I launched my own counteroffensive. I sent a copy of the leaked email chain to 3 local news outlets, along with footage of HOA members trespassing, signs being installed, and the changed locks. One station bit immediately. That Friday, a headline ran, "HOA tries to seize privately owned lake. Owner fights back." The news segment showed side-by-side comparisons of my deeded plat and the fake HOA map. It included Karen's quote from the email, which the anchor read aloud with delightful disgust. The clip went viral within hours. My inbox exploded. Strangers wrote me from other counties, thanking me for fighting back. One woman from Texas shared how her HOA tried to fine her for planting a fig tree without permission. Another from Oregon had lost access to her own barn due to redrawn boundaries. It was like I tapped into some underground resistance movement of landowners sick of being bullied by bureaucrats with clipboards. That weekend, the sheriff himself stopped by. He knocked, tipped his hat, and said, "I watched the news. Just wanted to say, you're doing the right thing." He also said I might want to install a few more cameras. I did. By the following Tuesday, the Ethics Board opened an investigation into Walter Drummond. He was placed on administrative leave pending review. Fairview HOA's board members, at least the ones not fully under Karen's spell, started making quiet calls to Connie's office. There was panic brewing in the ranks. But Karen, she doubled down. She posted a public letter on the HOA website calling me hostile, non-cooperative, and a threat to community cohesion. She claimed Whisper Lake had historically served as a shared ecological zone and that recent improvements had caused unforeseen disruption to neighborhood balance. She even tried to claim emotional damages on behalf of a member whose view of the tree line was altered by construction. I printed it out, poured a bourbon, and pinned it to my corkboard under a nice post-it that said, This woman thinks she's Napoleon. Connie was already 10 steps ahead. The moment that HOA letter hit the internet, she filed a counterclaim, a full-scale civil suit against Karen Morrison, the Fairview Waterside HOA, and associated individuals for trespassing, attempted fraudulent transfer of property, public misrepresentation, libel, and willful interference with private business operations. It was a mouthful, but she said it with the precision of a surgeon sharpening a blade. Then we brought out the heavy artillery. First, the drone footage. A few weeks prior, during one of the stranger lulls in the chaos, I'd flown my drone to get a promotional shot for Whisper Lake's upcoming nature retreat. I'd let the thing hover longer than usual, just for fun, sweeping across the lake, capturing the tree line, the gazebos, the reflections. What I didn't realize at the time was that I had recorded a full 15-minute segment of Karen Morrison and her HOA officers skulking around the property. The drone caught everything. They unloaded from a white SUV. One of them pulled bolt cutters from the trunk. Another carried a box of new signage. Karen, perfectly visible in a wide-brim hat and pearls like she was dressing for a coronation, stood near the main cottage pointing and directing. At one point, she physically handed a keyring to a man who disappeared into the guest house. The same house I later couldn't unlock. At one moment, she turned to the camera, the air above her, and smiled. I nearly choked when I found that clip. We trimmed it, watermarked it, and burned 3 copies. 1 for court, 1 for the press, 1 for fun. Second, the surveillance footage from my trail cams. The unit facing the dock had recorded 2 men unloading a Fairview HOA banner and hammering it into the soil beside my picnic table. They laughed, took selfies, and toasted something in plastic tumblers. The camera caught clear facial features, timestamps, and license plates. The third camera, one I had hidden in a hollowed tree, captured audio of the same men referring to the site as Karen's new legacy project. Between the drone, the trail cams, and the HOA's own flyers, we had overwhelming physical evidence of their trespassing, forced entry, illegal signage, and intent to annex. Connie added a charge of attempted fraudulent conveyance and a formal request for punitive damages. Then came the media storm. The second news station picked up the story, this time with real teeth. They ran a primetime segment titled Hijacking Heaven When HOAS Go Rogue. It opened with side-by-side clips, one of me restoring the lake, hammering in the first dock plank, smiling beside a flowering dogwood, and then the drone footage of Karen, orchestrating her private HOA invasion like a dictator surveying a newly conquered province. The story blew up. National outlets picked it up. HOA watchdog groups featured it in newsletters. I was suddenly getting interview requests from YouTube legal analysts, property rights podcasts, even NPR. One blogger dubbed Karen the HOA Queen of Delusion. Another referred to Whisper Lake as the last private paradise under siege. But not everyone was laughing. Karen tried to fight back with a press release, claiming the footage was deeply misleading, accusing me of manipulative editing, and asserting that the drone violated her privacy. The internet did what the internet does, and within 24 hours, her entire HOA board was drowning in angry emails, legal inquiries, and threats of mass resignation from members who had no idea any of this was happening. That's when the first domino fell. One of the Fairview board members, a guy named Greg Millstone, flipped. His lawyer contacted Connie. Greg agreed to sign an affidavit confirming that Karen had misled the board, never disclosed the lack of ownership over the lake, and actively manipulated zoning filings using her connections. He also handed over internal documents showing that HOA funds had been used to print signs, pay a private locksmith, and even reimburse volunteer hours for the so-called patrol officers. They'd paid people to trespass. With the affidavit, the footage, the documents, and the full audit trail from Roy's investigation, we were ready. Connie filed an emergency petition for expedited trial and preliminary injunctive relief, citing ongoing damages and escalating risk. The judge scheduled the hearing for the following week. In the meantime, I hired a private security firm to guard the property. Whisper Lake was locked down like Fort Knox. The patrols stopped. The flyers vanished. And for the first time in 2 months, no one tried to walk into my woods uninvited. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Karen was still out there, still making noise, still telling anyone who'd listen that I was the real villain, that I'd stolen something that rightfully belonged to the spiritual cohesion of Fairview. What she didn't know was that her own HOA was already pulling the rug out from under her. And court was only 6 days away. The courtroom smelled like old paper, coffee, and bad intentions. Rows of folding chairs were filled with residents from both sides of the timber belt, local reporters, and a few curious folks from town who just wanted to watch someone finally put an HOA in its place. I wore a clean button-down and a pair of boots I'd polished with anxiety. Karen naturally arrived in a crisp white blazer, pearl earrings, and the self-confidence of a woman who still didn't believe she'd done anything wrong. The judge, a blunt, gray-haired woman named Marla Kirkland, was not in the mood for games. Connie opened our case with the aerial footage. The courtroom went silent as the drone video played, Karen gesturing like a general, her volunteers replacing locks, staking out signage. Then came the trail cam footage, the internal emails, the forged community transition documents, and Greg Millstone's affidavit. Piece by piece, Connie laid it out with surgical precision. When Karen's attorney tried to object, the judge shut it down with a wave of her hand. "Save it for closing," she said. "Right now, I'm watching a coordinated trespass caught on 3 different cameras." By the time we reached the reimbursement forms, payments made from HOA dues to cover the printing of signs for Whisper Lake integration, the room was buzzing. People were whispering, shaking their heads. A few HOA members from Fairview openly walked out. Then Karen did something I didn't expect. She asked to take the stand. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but she insisted. Hands clasped, expression serene, like this was her redemption arc. She spoke clearly, passionately. She said she believed Whisper Lake was a natural inheritance of the neighborhood, that I had revived a sacred space, and that it was only right to ensure its benefits were shared. She admitted to authorizing the flyers, the signs, the site visits, but denied any malicious intent. It was, according to her, a misunderstanding born from vision. Then Connie stood. "Miss Morrison," she asked, holding up a printed email, "is this your signature?" Karen glanced. "Yes. And in this email, you told your board, and I quote, 'Walter says, as long as we act like it's ours, the optics will work in our favor.' You also called my client a stubborn parasite in denial. Did you write that?" A pause. "Yes," she said. The judge leaned forward. "Let me be very clear," she said. "This court does not tolerate fraudulent claims, tampering with private property, or bureaucratic theater dressed up as governance. What I've seen here today is an orchestrated attempt to annex private land using deceit, intimidation, and county loopholes." She turned to the clerk. "Effective immediately, I'm issuing a permanent injunction against the Fairview Waterside HOA, barring any further contact, claim, or representation involving Whisper Lake or Mr. Wells' property. Furthermore, Ms. Morrison," Karen visibly stiffened, "you are hereby placed under arrest for falsification of official documents, conspiracy to commit fraudulent property transfer, and obstruction of legal zoning processes." The bailiff stepped forward. Karen didn't fight, didn't speak. Just stood, hands shaking as the cuffs clicked shut. There was a moment of surreal quiet. Then, from the back row, someone clapped, then another. The room broke into scattered applause, disbelief, and the rustle of reporters sprinting for the courthouse exit to get the story online first. Afterwards, the fallout came fast. Karen was removed from her HOA position by emergency vote. Walter Drummond resigned from the planning board under investigation. The Fairview HOA was fined by the county for misappropriation of funds and unethical conduct. My lawyer received formal apologies from both the zoning office and 2 county commissioners. And me? I got my land back, every inch of it. The damages awarded totaled $415,000, restitution for trespassing, repair costs, legal fees, and the hit to my short-term rental income. I used part of it to rebuild the gazebo, fix the dock, and commission a local artist to carve a new wooden sign, "Whisper Lake Haven, private land, public integrity." 6 months later, I hosted my first Restoration and Rights Festival, a weekend gathering for property owners who had battled against overreach. We had workshops, fire pits, music by the lake, and a big community dinner. Connie gave a keynote speech called "How Not to Get HOA'd." People came from 4 counties. The story lived on, not just as a viral headline, but as a reminder that land, when lawfully earned and legally protected, isn't something you get to vote on. You don't get to redraw the map just because you don't like the one that already exists. And now, whenever someone pulls up to Whisper Lake, the first thing they see is a tall steel sign at the gate, private property, not part of any HOA. Trespassers will be filmed, exposed, and prosecuted. And beneath it, just for flair, ask Karen how it went last time.